Welcome, everybody. It's wonderful to have you here. We're going to begin in a couple of minutes as we allow other people to arrive. So I appreciate your patience as we let people come in. Again, welcoming all of you as we wait for a minute or two more to see if other people will be joining us and arriving to this webinar. Imagine you're arriving to a shared space where we're all there, so we'll just wait a minute or two more to get started. Wonderful. So we're going to get started. It is really wonderful and an honor to welcome you today to this program, The State of Our Immigration System, Local and National Perspectives, organized by JCRC. My name is Rabbi Claudia Grayman. I am the Senior Rabbi of TBZ in Brookline and a proud member of the Board of Directors of JCRC. And I'm honored to be beginning and opening this program today. And I just will say a word before I introduce Jeremy that will introduce us to this wonderful panelists that we have today about JCRC work and why for me personally, and as a rabbi in my community at TBZ is so important to support the work of immigration. First of all, I'm an immigrant myself to this country, and as an immigrant who has been welcomed and received in such open ways to this community, to this country, I feel an obligation to work for a better immigration systems for all of those who want to come here. So that's kind of my personal take on this. Our community, TBZ, together with the support of the work of JCRC, has been incredibly involved around JCRC work. I'm thinking about three things that are really important in the work that JCRC has been doing, supporting a sanctuary program we had at the beginning of the Trump administration called the Newton Sanctuary Collaborative, where we hosted a church in Newton, St. Paul's in Newton, people that were looking for sanctuary, and many, excuse me for that, I didn't realize my, here it is, I apologize. And we were able to support several people that were in sanctuary. The other things that I'm thinking about is the Newton Brooklyn Asylum Resettlement Coalition, NBARC, Newton Brooklyn Asylum Resettlement Coalition, that we have been involved and continue to host asylum seekers in our communities, also many communities in the area being part of this. And last but not least, Beyond, which really has been an incredibly network of people helping community people that are in immigration jail. I personally, before COVID, and I hope now that things are getting a little bit better, go back to spend time visiting people in ICE detention center as a Spanish speaker, being able to support them through this time. So again, JCRC really supporting this work, and me as a rabbi really feeling that this is the call of our tradition. And without further ado, I'll introduce Jeremy Burton, who is our wonderful executive director, who will tell us more about this program. Jeremy.
Thank you very much, Rev. Claudia. It's such a pleasure and a blessing to have you as part of our board and to be part of this work with us. So before we get started with our panel, let me just say that JCRC's commitment to partnering with immigrant and refugee communities goes back to our earliest years, when many of those refugees were Jews fleeing Europe after the Holocaust, and then later from the Soviet Union and, as Claudia mentioned, from other parts of the world. More recently, we've continued to work with HIAS, which you'll hear more about, to challenge the Obama administration to raise the refugee cap. And in the earliest days of the Trump administration, we led the Boston Jewish community in a resounding commitment of solidarity to immigrants here in Massachusetts. We are proud of the work we have done to help establish sanctuary clusters throughout Greater Boston. We worked with 18 Jewish communities and hundreds of volunteers to establish comprehensive systems of support for several immigrant families. We are particularly proud of the work that Claudia noted in partnering with others to establish the Boston Immigrant Justice Accompaniment Network to accompany immigrants both in and coming out of detention. Since early 2018, we've organized hundreds of Jewish leaders and volunteers to help people detained in Massachusetts access legal representation, court accompaniment, and post-detention support. And we also worked in partnership with the Beyond Bond and Legal Defense Fund to raise over $1 million to bond out 200 people from ICE detention. We are grateful to our partners in this work, 3 of whom are joining us today. We know that the challenges of immigration have been in the headlines recently, and it continues to be an issue of great concern to the Jewish community. But today, we'd like to dig a little bit deeper and get a sense of what this work looks like on the ground, both locally in Massachusetts and nationally across the country. And I'm really thrilled to introduce our panelists today. Now, I should just say up front, we had hoped to have Ava Malona, our longtime partner and the leader of the Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition, with us today. But tomorrow, she's starting a new role at the Department of Homeland Security, bringing justice and empathy to the work of the agency that includes ICE. So we congratulate her, and standing in at the last minute is Jessica Chico, Director of the New Americans Initiative at MIRA, Pastor Kiki, the President of the True Alliance Center and a really close partner to JCRC in so many ways, and Rebecca Kersner, the Senior Director of Grassroots Campaigns at HIAS. They all have extensive bios because of their years of great work that you can read on our website, and we'll link those in the chat. Before our panel begins, I'll remind you, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen if you have questions, and we will attempt to make time to answer all of them. Jessica, Pastor Kiki, Rebecca, thank you for joining us today. We'll start with some opening remarks from each panelist. Jessica, why don't you begin?
Thank you, Jeremy, for that introduction. And I'll try and channel Ava as much as possible in my remarks today. So there's no denying that we're in a different place in terms of our discourse on immigration than we were even not too long ago. We no longer find ourselves at MIRA on the defensive all the time. I think we spent the past 4 years or so kind of constantly responding to harmful policies that seem to kind of crop up weekly, sometimes daily. Instead, now we're faced with a real opportunity for positive changes, not just undoing the harmful policies of the last administration, but really digging in and finally addressing the many aspects of our immigration law and policy that we've been advocating around for a long time, long before the Trump administration. So on the federal level right now, that means pushing for inclusive COVID relief, relief that will be available to all in our communities, regardless of immigration status, restoring protections for asylum seekers and refugees, ending the harmful enforcement practices that criminalize immigrants through detention and the entanglement of immigration enforcement and local and state police, addressing the harm caused by the public charge rule, and reducing barriers to citizenship and integration. We also have a window of opportunity to push for legislation that would create a pathway to citizenship and permanent protection for all. If needed, starting with our dreamers, our TPS holders, our essential workers, but not stopping there. So President Biden sent a bill to Congress, the U.S. Citizenship Act, that is fairly broad and would provide a path to citizenship for most. There are several pieces of legislation before Congress right now. The House has already passed 2 bills that would provide a path to citizenship for dreamers and TPS holders. as well as for farm workers. And their own Senator Warren introduced a bill earlier this year that would provide a path to citizenship for essential workers. And I'm happy to speak more about that. On the state level, our legislative campaigns continue. That's our campaigns for the Safe Communities Act and the Driving and the Work and Family Mobility Act. Those are pieces of legislation that would increase public health and public safety by taking immigration enforcement out of local policing and provide driver's licenses to all. And beyond that, really, the pandemic really shifted our priorities so that we focused on the population of immigrants that were not eligible for benefits, unauthorized workers that were not eligible for unemployment insurance and the expanded unemployment benefits, and that were afraid to even access the benefits for which they qualified due to kind of an aggressive enforcement tactics. We were able to secure $15 million in the state budget last year with a one-to-one match for philanthropy for the most vulnerable in our communities, including undocumented and unauthorized workers. And this was a big shift and something that we'd never been able to do before. The pandemic also kind of brought, really kind of magnified the urgency of the need for language access. And so this past year, we've worked with the Mass Law Reform Institute, MA Appleseed, and the Southeast Justice Center to draft and get introduced the Language Access and Inclusion Act. And lastly, we've been doing a lot of work around vaccine equity and the need for the government to work collaboratively with community organizations to advocate and direct resources to where they are most needed. So I'll stop there in terms of kind of initial framing, and I very much look forward to this conversation.
Thank you. Pastor Kiki, and then we'll go to Rebecca.
Thank you so very much, Jeremy, for this opportunity that I have. And I want to thank JCRC also for this privilege that I have just to be part of this forum, which is extremely important to myself as an immigrant, coming as a young just person in this country, and seeing exactly what happened. And I also would like to thank the panelists, well represented. They are mentors and they know exactly what it takes just to accompany the immigrant communities. And I'm also just grateful to my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, for keeping me alive, just despite the epidemic corona that has definitely devastated the world and also hit so greatly the Haitian community. And also we are so grateful this month, the month of May, is the Haitian Heritage Month celebrated in Massachusetts. We had many events planned, but we also about equity and access. I do represent several organizations, and also being part of a Greater Boston Interfaith Organization, GBIO, working on social justice, immigration justice, food justice, housing justice, anything that has to do with the justice that is rooted in the character of God. We are basically in it. I would definitely sing a new tune today and a new chorus, because with the news that we had received this weekend regarding the TPS provision for all Haitian individuals and families. That's, in a sense, I'm so grateful to the administration, to the Biden administration, and also grateful to all our allies. We have Jessica, Representative Mira, that has been working so tirelessly, Mass Law Reform Institute, GBIO, and also JCRC, as well as Lawyers for Civil Rights. Basically, in all of the allies and advocates, elected officials, I'm so grateful to all of you for the work, the magnitude work of advocacy that bring us today, and all Haitians in the country will be well protected, because we were so frustrated last week. As a matter of fact, last Thursday was the 35th flight of deportation of Haitians to Haiti. And we're wondering what would happen, what would make this expulsion to stop. But we definitely thank God. We always say, thank God, praise God, from whom all miracles, all blessings flow, because he makes it possible just for these the Haitian families to receive the reprieve and the relief, knowing that they just don't have to be worried now to be deported to a country that has the acute political situations on social and economic definitely dilemma. So they are well protected from now and ongoing. So we cannot be too happy and too comfortable because this decision only applies to Haitians, and we have also our counterparts, National TPS Committee, that has been working with us, also all the other nations, hoping for the same fate for them. So we pray that the administration can definitely just consider also extending this provision to all TPS holders, and then the fight will continue because we would definitely like to see a permanent solution, meaning permanent residency for the TPS DACA recipients, but as well also for all the 11 and more millions undocumented in this country. So I'll stop right there. So definitely we can have a much profound discussion and ready for your questions. Thank you so very much for having me.
Yeah, I want to thank everyone so much for inviting me and for inviting HIAS to speak on this panel. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. And I want to start by thanking all of you, because I know that this community has taken so much action based on our shared Jewish values and history to make sure that really that each and every person who is fleeing for their life and in danger can find a pathway to safety, because I think that that is so deeply connected to our Jewish story and to our Jewish values. I have a front row seat as the director of campaigns for HIAS to how much it matters that the advocacy from the Jewish community is happening, that the direct service is happening, the volunteering, all of the public community program, community programming. It mattered to the conversation in the past few years, and it continues to matter. So I just wanted to start by saying thank you to the JCRC and to all of the partners of the JCRC who are part of this program. So I'll say a few words about HIAS's work, and then I'm looking forward to the broader conversation. So I am here representing HIAS. We are the world's oldest refugee agency with over 1,000 staff in more than 70 offices in 16 countries, where we focus on providing legal aid, psychosocial care, sexual and gender-based violence protection, job training, and economic sustainability to refugees. We were founded in New York's Lower East Side in 1881 to provide aid to Jewish immigrants. And in our first 120 years, we really did just that, helping 4.5 million Jews to come to the United States, whether they were fleeing pogroms in Russia, genocide in Europe, religious persecution in Iran, Cuba, the Soviet Union. And what we have determined is that most of the American Jewish community has at least one relative that was helped by HIAS at some point along the way. And then HIAS really started to evolve. Our transformation began about 20 years ago into an organization that now assists tens of thousands of refugees every year based on need, regardless of religion, race, or nationality. And so the best descriptor of our organization remains that once we helped refugees because the refugees were Jewish, and now we help refugees because we are. So, but enough about numbers. We help people. So just to give a few examples of what our work looks like in this day and age, today HIAS operates in 13 refugee camps in Chad, aiding the survivors of the Darfur genocide. We're on the Greek island of Lesbos, providing aid to people who cross the Mediterranean in search of safety in Europe and are now trapped on Lesbos. We provided economic assistance around the world to people who lost their livelihoods due to COVID and were not covered by the safety nets in their countries because of their lack of status. We work in 9 countries in Latin America, where we comprise one of the largest international responses to the humanitarian emergency in Venezuela. We resettle refugees across the United States. And then I also want to mention that we provide legal services all along the US-Mexico border, where just in the past few months, our staff has accompanied thousands of individuals into the United States who had been trapped in Mexico due to the harmful Remain in Mexico program that was rescinded by the Biden administration and had been put in place by the Trump administration. So with the start of the Biden administration, I will say that we are really in a different political context. We had 4 years of nonstop kind of attacks on both the refugee resettlement program and on the asylum program. And we now have an administration that has really stated their commitment to refugees, whether they come through either of those 2 paths, through the refugee resettlement program or the asylum program. But that really isn't enough to just kind of state a commitment, because both of those 2 programs have been very seriously damaged and now need to be rebuilt one step at a time. There were over 1,000 changes that the Trump administration made to the immigration process that now need to be looked at. And so while it feels like a really wonderful change, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And as Jeremy said at the beginning of the program, this is ongoing work. This is work that we've done in every single administration, Republican or Democrat, to stand up for the rights of refugees and asylum seekers. And there's so much that we need to be able to do right now. Because the fact of the matter is that the world has become a terrifyingly difficult place for people who have lost safety, for people who have fled their homes. There are a real shortage of countries that are able to help refugees or willing to help refugees. There are more people who have fled their homes at any other point than at any other point in human history, and fewer places for them to go. So I want to just kind of end by saying that, with 1 out of every 100 people in the world displaced from their homes, it really is, incumbent upon us as a people who experience the refugee story ourselves, who are part of that ongoing legacy as Jews, to be able to stand up for the rights of refugees. And I'm looking forward to discussing how we'll do that.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you, Pastor Kiki, and thank you, Rebecca. I want to bring you all back on camera now and have a conversation, and remind our audience to please use the Q&A function to post your questions, and we'll try to get to all of them. But I think maybe where we'll start is this new administration. And Rebecca, you touched on it pretty directly and clearly. At the same time, I think all of you actually touched on what's going on with this new administration. And let me just invite all of you to sort of engage this question about what has changed and what has stayed the same and what have you been surprised by. And I'll offer, Rebecca and I, we were in the trenches, literally late night in hotels, strategizing around the Obama administration's willingness to welcome in Syrian refugees once upon a time. And
we sure were.
And Rebecca, yeah, I remember that. And you referenced, the last 4 years were obviously very different, fight on all fronts. And yet at the same time, I will say that I had some surprise earlier this year when the Biden administration was maybe not as aggressive as we wanted in raising the cap, and there was all of a sudden need to mobilize within the advocacy community that maybe we didn't expect to have to do. At the same time, Pastor Kiki, you've referenced this the TPS, like what has happened for the Haitian community in the last couple of days, and that there's other work to be done. And certainly, Jessica, your agency has been impacted in a very direct way by changes in leadership in this administration. So really, if you could each speak to what's changed and what stayed the same, but more particularly also what surprised each of you over the last couple of months with the Biden administration. Rebecca, do you want to start?
Sure. I would say that to me, it really feels like a dramatic change. I do believe that going after the refugee program and especially going after asylum seekers crossing the border was a strategy of the Trump administration. I think that they used refugees and asylum seekers as being the scapegoats for a lot of other social problems, and it was kind of a political strategy to go after that population. And they paid particular attention to kind of dismantling those programs. In those years, I didn't really feel like the advocacy that we did, mattered or, would be really acted on or really heard, that it was kind of more like protesting and less about coordinating. So at least what the Biden administration says is that they have a commitment to this program, which is wonderful. And I'll say, that commitment was also echoed by probably almost every administration prior to the Trump administration, Republican or Democrat. And so it's wonderful to hear that commitment. However, I agree with you, Jeremy. I was surprised when they said one thing and then it took them a while to be able to actually sign on to that legislation and make the changes, to be able to sign the presidential determination to raise the number of refugees who are coming to the United States. I've noticed that they are very interested in hearing what the public has to say, and they're very open to, kind of public pressure on both border issues and, resettlement issues. And so it makes our advocacy even more important to make sure that they hear that it's a priority.
Thank you. Jessica, Pastor Kiki, do you want to?
Sure, I can hop in here. So what I can say is that our priorities really haven't changed. The work continues. And in fact, probably our priorities have not significantly changed, even if you go 10, 15 years back. I mean, one of the things that's been happening as Ava packs up her office is she's been finding, all these briefs that we wrote 10 years ago, calling for many of the same things that we're calling still today, right? At the same time, we have seen movement and at times significant, right? So the redesignation of temporary protected status for Haiti is an example of that. The ending of the harmful public charge regulation is an example of that. The undoing of the Muslim travel ban, the returning to the previous version of the citizenship test after a new version had been kind of hurriedly rolled out in the fall, ending of the Remain in Mexico policy. I mean, we have certainly seen, significant policy decisions that have made a market movement. But there's a lot that still remains the same and a lot that still needs to be undone, right? So we're still seeing, I think, even thousands of people being turned away at the border under Title 42, under, public health grounds that most public health experts say, are not supportive of this policy. I think what has surprised me a little bit is how slow at times and measured the steps of the Biden administration have been. I think one thing that we saw during the Trump administration was just the power of litigation. and how vulnerable executive action can be to being challenged in the courts. And so I think that there's a real desire from this administration to show that it is, taking the steps to think things through, to deliberate, to do what it needs to do, so that if it finds itself in a position of having to defend its policy decisions, that it's well equipped to do that. So, perhaps that's what has surprised me more than any particular decision.
Yeah, let me also add, because Mira is our partner, speaking on behalf of just the many immigrant organizations that have been working just to improve the quality of life, bringing education, and helping people dispelling the fear they have toward immigration, even accessing during COVID, the most needed resources. People were afraid to access those resources, knowing that they will be falling upon the public charge. They might not be able to petition for their family members. Also, just visiting some places, they might be apprehended by ICE. But that's, in a sense, give us a sign of relief with this new administration. We think we can have the ears of some, not only the elected official, but some also cabinet members who would listen to our requests, to our demands, to our cry, who would understand our issues. I remember that back in 2010-11, when they designated Haiti for TPS, I was able just to work with the office of District 1 in Boston. So that office was so receptive to our needs, sending immigration officers to many places to inform and educate our community regarding the benefits of TPS. And then with the former administration, we never had that. We never had any connection with USCIS Boston at all, even trying to get some cases resolved. It was a nightmare. So all our requests really fell on deaf ears. And then with the recent, with the rescission of TPS also for Haiti since 2017, we have been in a fight, definitely just to help protecting our community. So in a sense, we could say there's a sign of relief with this administration, with the new appointees that are familiar to the immigrant communities and understand the plight and also the issues facing the immigrant communities. And I believe that, in a sense, is a sign of relief. Moving forward, we'll definitely be able to get some more accomplished during this administration.
Thank you. So obviously we are a local JCRC organization here in Massachusetts. To some extent, we're having a conversation with some of our local partners, but we also recognize that this work is national, and there are probably people who are joining us today from all over the country. So I'm going to ask this next one in sort of two parts, and I would first direct this to Jessica and Pastor Kiki, and then to Rebecca, and to talk about sort of the state level impact of the work and how that's changed. And Jessica, you may note in your opening remarks of the work that Mira has been doing on the Safe Communities Act and the Mobility Act. You made reference to like some of the priorities haven't changed for 10 years or more. I know that we at JCRC have been in that coalition with you. We're a member organization of Mira. I'm fairly certain, I'm correct here, that the Safe Communities Act was something we were working on 2 presidents ago under President Obama, and it has not yet happened in Massachusetts. For all that we talk about Massachusetts being the hub of various things. So like for Jessica, for Pastor Kiki, I would invite you, like, what are the priorities, advocacy, legislative, policy-wise here in Massachusetts? How are those changing now? How do we reflect on campaigns that have now been going on for the better part of a decade? And Rebecca, I would ask you to follow up with like, what insights do you have as you look at this from the national scope of like what's going on in other states? What can we in Massachusetts maybe learn from other states? What are you seeing as trends in terms of statewide issues that are being addressed?
Sure, well, I can start. I think, following the election, there was kind of this sense, we started to hear this buzz of like, oh, well, now, the Trump administration will come to an end. We'll have the Biden administration. Like, we don't need to worry so much about, immigration enforcement. Do we really need the Safe Communities Act? And the answer is yes. The Safe Communities Act is still very much needed. Unauthorized immigrants still need driver's licenses. As the pandemic made clear, the Safe Communities Act is not just about public safety, it's about public health, right? When immigrants are afraid, they retreat from services, they forego medical care. There's this generalized fear of immigration consequences up to and including deportation. What has changed, and so in that way, our state priorities, we've added on to our state priorities, right? Because now we really very much also need to think about vaccine equity. We really very much need to think about COVID relief. But our core priorities, the Safe Communities Act, the driver's license bill, now adding in the language access bill, have not changed. What I think has changed, and what actually one of the questions in the Q&A also refers to, is the narrative has really shifted as a result of COVID. We've seen our immigrant communities being disproportionately affected by COVID, not just the health impact, but the economic impact. But we have seen unauthorized workers and mixed status families kind of making this move from being seen as outliers in the communities to being heralded as essential workers. And they were always essential workers, right? They didn't suddenly become essential workers because of COVID. They always were, but all of a sudden it became acceptable to talk about immigrants, including unauthorized immigrants, as essential workers. And so I think that really creates an opportunity. Right, it's always the narrative that that leads the work. What hasn't changed when it comes to the state work is, the governor stated a position and intent to veto both of these bills, and so the need to really create a supermajority, a 2/3 majority in both the House and the Senate. But I think there's more, as a result, more momentum behind both of these bills than we've had before.
Just from a community leader standpoint, working with the people, I see the agony that causes, even for the TPS recipients that has their driver license and could not renew it because of the no status, the implementation of the real ID in Massachusetts. That creates a hurdles for TPS recipients to get their driver license renewed. And then talking about the state priorities, driver license, it's a priority. It should be a must for Massachusetts to pass this legislation because we're talking about temporary license for 6 months, license for a year, because we help people with medical deferred action that receive authorization for 1 year. And by the time they receive the authorization card, 6 months already passed. So when they go and apply for a license or Mass ID, they're going to do it for 6 months. Even though, but the new decision comes right now for the for Haitians in terms of TPS, they're going to get a driver license just valid for 18 months. What about the rest of the other undocumented families that have no opportunities in that effect to help their spouses, help their children get to school or get to the hospitals, because we have so many mixed families in the Commonwealth as well in the Commonwealth. So those people relying only on one person to carry the heavy load, work, do everything, just without a driver license. That creates a nightmare just dealing with this situation on a daily basis. And then we have all the families also that are afraid to get out because even though they're facing some abuses, they are afraid to still call in the police. It depends where they live in the state, because some areas they live in, they will not be able to call the police because they'll be referred to ICE to that aspect. So nationally, I mean, talking about just at the state level, even the driver license, it's crucial. We'd like to see that happening for the 16th year. So I think we've been knocking the doors at the state legislatures to making sure that that happened, to bring some relief. And this is why we have the high rate of COVID infections among the immigrant populations. Basically, they have no way of getting around just without being together into a bus or being together into a van together. That's what we have, the high rates of infection. Just passing the state driver license was extremely helpful, as well as the Safe Communities Act. I testified last week regarding the language access and inclusion. Basically, just people spend 3 to 4 months before receiving a paycheck during COVID. Never expected to see this thing happening in the Commonwealth. They've never been laid off from their work. They've been working for 15, 20 years. They don't even know what email is, how to establish an email. For them to try to navigate the system, to call, couldn't find anybody to talk to. So it creates a nightmare for the families that definitely increase the level of trauma that families were facing. So those are the, basically in terms of the state's priorities. And I'm going to add another one, the ITIN situation. So we have so many ITIN holders who paid taxes on a yearly basis, but not being able to receive any stimulus because of the ITIN. That the state could do much more basically just to help them out. I understand in terms of nationally, because immigration is so complex, people were asking why those people 20 years in the country are not now being a permanent resident. So many complexity. And I think that the national level, I mean, at the state level, we could definitely bring some relief and some legislation to help those families, as well as when we're working toward the national aspect of it.
So I only have 2 things to add, and I want to answer it kind of in 2 different ways. So one is on the statewide issues themselves, the state and local issues. And I would just say that in terms of, you know, the priorities that I would consider in terms of refugees and asylum seekers is that hopefully, you know, given all of the changes that are slowly happening from the Biden administration, there will be a lot more refugees and a lot more asylum seekers coming to every local community, but certainly to your area in the Boston area. And that is going to require a lot of on the ground support and a lot of real thinking around how to create welcoming environments, which is both about the volunteer support and the direct service support and the congregation sponsoring, you know, refugee families and providing, you know, aid and that type of thing. But it's also about state and local advocacy to make sure that there is funding and support for refugees coming in. You know, that school districts are trained and able to work with students who are refugees, that there's housing available, that there's support services available. Just at the end of last week, for example, a bill was passed in the California legislature, which is wonderful, providing the same type of caseworker support for asylees, meaning people who have gained asylum, as already exists for resettled refugees, which is a great a way of making sure that people are able to access the benefits that they're entitled to, such as you know, welfare benefits or healthcare, things like that. So I just want to, you know, make sure that, you know, everyone is thinking about the fact that there are a lot more people who are going to be coming to your area, and there's a huge role to play in terms of setting up the conditions to make it welcoming for refugees who are coming, which is honestly, you know, a wonderful problem to have, and, you know, something that we need to urgently work on. And then the second thing is that I do think there's a huge role in terms of national advocacy right now. There's so much that the Biden administration still needs to do. There's so much that they've done. There's way more that they need to do. But everything that they do is an executive action, which could be undone by the next administration and then redone and then undone and then redone. So these things need to be legislated. It can't just be an executive action after an executive action, such that, you know, whole categories of people, let's say, you know, dreamers, for example, are protected for 4 years and then unprotected and then protected and then unprotected. These things need to be actually passed through Congress. And so, you know, one way that HIAS, really works with local communities is on the national advocacy to make sure that these members of Congress are signed on to all of the right pieces of legislation, and those pieces of legislation are moving through. And it's just so critical to be able to, to legislate some of these changes at this point and not just rely on an executive action, which could change. It could change as soon as the administration changes, which is something that we've seen so recently. So I would encourage you all also to be thinking about the national advocacy as being a huge contribution that can be made locally.
Well, since we're there, why don't we go? There are questions that are being posted. I think people are already addressing, and that's great. Let's stay with this issue of the immigration system and sort of the whole, as Rebecca, the whole categories of people that like essentially their lives and their futures are up in the air every 4 years. And invite all of us, what do we do? What can be done to inoculate the immigration system? And Rebecca, yes, you noted legislating on this as opposed to executive orders. We also know that Congress is, divided straight down the middle. That is not an easy proposition. So I'm curious, Jessica, as an advocacy organization, and all of you, how do you think about that work of seizing this moment for more lasting and sustained systemic change?
Yeah, well, this is something that we've been thinking a lot about, right? Because we have just really witnessed how easily things can shift when it's up to executive orders or sometimes litigation. So one way to do it, short of legislation, which I agree is certainly the preferred option, right? And like, there's nothing harder to undo than a statute, is regulation, right? So that's when the agency kind of puts its policy and formalizes it via a federal regulation and has to go through a formal notice and comment period. So they post it, people have an opportunity to weigh in, they finalize it. So obviously it's not legislation, it doesn't have to go through Congress. It is still subject to change, but it does require enough process that it provides some of that inoculation, right? Some of that protection. And then I think the larger work that continues to be done is working on the public narrative, right? I saw a question about whether this kind of shift in narrative, the support for unauthorized workers and essential workers is going to continue post-pandemic. And I'd like to think that there's going to be some residual benefits, right? That it will be in the back of everyone's mind. But I also know that we can't just count on that, right? I don't think that just because there's that support now and that narrative now, it's likely to be there even 2 years from now, right? So that's why it's important to kind of seize on that moment and do what we can through legislation now. And we do have an opportunity through the upcoming infrastructure package that requires just a simple majority vote to potentially, get some relief and path to citizenship.
There are questions, discussion around attacking the just the root cause of migration, because I saw a question regarding what those people can definitely go back to their country and make a life better for them. But this is not easy, just going back home. Just let me give you just the example of my country, Haiti, right now. So we hope after the earthquake, just things could get better, but we still have the political unrest, social dilemma out there, economic disaster still taking place, widespread of kidnapping, school have to close down there. So then the situation back in the original countries are not great, are not well, by the way, just due to the policies that have been in place, that have been put in place to support the structure that was definitely established back 15, 20 years ago. And then those people cannot remain in the country. You've seen that the caravan coming throughout Central America, including Haitians also. They're everywhere. There was just a documentary back in 2018 that states that almost 150,000 Haitians live in Chile. Understand that. So the situation in Chile and Brazil, they're all over the place. It has to do with the policies put in place in their own countries. They cannot remain in their own countries. That's why they have to come to USA. And when they come to USA, they're willing to do whatever it takes to make the best out of it for their family members by integrating themselves into the American system and do the right thing.
So, we're sort of coming to the end of the hour, and we've touched on a lot of topics, and I guess I want to get to sort of what can we do locally, and particularly what can we do locally as a partner, as an advocacy organization, as a community. We know there've been a lot of things touched on over the course of the last hour. So really, for all the people on this who are here today with us, and for the various organizations and agencies and communities we're connected to, what can we all be doing to support each of your work?
I can go first, perhaps. So, as I just mentioned, we have an opportunity to include, for example, citizenship for essential workers, or a path to citizenship for essential workers as part of the next COVID infrastructure package. That is a bill that was introduced by Senator Warren as well as Senator Padilla out in California on the Senate side, and it would provide a path to citizenship for, I think, a minimum of 5 million currently unauthorized workers, and possibly much more than that. Essential workers is defined quite broadly, and the states have an opportunity to designate their own categories of essential workers as well to reflect kind of their needs and their economy. So that's an important opportunity. So I would I would urge you all to call your representative, but also your senator, and ask them not only to co-sponsor the Citizenship for Essential Workers Act, but also to include it as part of the infrastructure package. And then on the state side, we're continuing to phone bank to try and reach our 2/3 majority in both the House and the Senate in Massachusetts for the Safe Communities Act and the Work and Family Mobility Act. So I would say get on our website, sign up for our bulletin so that you can see when those opportunities are available. Or if you really want to get super involved, you can contact me directly.
Thank you.
Well, I totally understand the magnitude of the situation for immigrants. You ask what people can do at the state level. So we definitely need more state legislatures to join us in this fight. We had 105 totally. So we need at least in the state, at the state rep, we need about 120. Is that right, Jessica? We need 120 in order for us to the driver license to pass. We're still about 75, 80. So we need you just to go and call your rep and tell them to support the driver license bill as well as the Safe Communities Act. And also call your senators and ask for that assistance, that support that we definitely need at the state level. And at the federal level, we know that we need a permanent solution. The Dream and Promise Act has already passed in Congress. Just we need you to come together and just to represent a voice for those immigrants to have that path to legalization and later to naturalization. And this is what we definitely would like you to take a vital part in that aspect, to protect all immigrants basically in this country, to making sure that they pass the comprehensive immigration reform so that everyone can be protected.
So I think the easiest answer to this question is that if you are interested in taking action through HIAS, I would encourage you to go to the HIAS Take Action page, which has kind of a myriad of different types of ways to help, from things that take 30 seconds to do. For example, signing a petition to remove Title 42, which is currently blocking thousands of asylum seekers from coming into the United States. The border is still more closed than it has ever been. To supporting legislation for Uyghur refugees from China, to supporting certain individual pieces of legislation in Congress. And then, we also have our volunteer opportunities up on that page. We are looking for Spanish-speaking volunteers. We're looking for lawyers who can take pro bono cases. We're looking for people who are willing to donate some of the air miles that they've accumulated in this past COVID year when none of us took airplanes. There's a myriad of different ways to support refugees in different parts of the country and world. So I would encourage you to just peruse that page and see if there's something on there for you. And then I would also make kind of a plea from the heart to talk about your support for immigrants and talk about your support for refugees, because I think that what tends to happen in the public conversation, what I see in the media, what I see politicians doing is talking about immigration as if it were a problem that we need to solve, when it is not. It is an incredible, wonderful thing for our country. And, we're talking about our neighbors, our friends, our teachers, our doctors, and I think that we need to be much louder about the fact that we as people who live in this country want to make the pathway for more people to come here much easier, and the pathway for people who are already here much easier, in terms of being able to access all the privileges that they could access as Americans. So I want to just make a plea to kind of contribute to the public conversation in that way, and to talk about immigration as, in a very different way from what the public conversation tends to be. But yes, definitely find a way to get involved locally or nationally. This is the moment to do it.
Thank you. That's an excellent note to end on. As Ava Malona always reminds me in these conversations, we tend to treat immigration and refugees as an enforcement problem, even the fact that it lives within the Department of Homeland Security, and not, as Rebecca, you so eloquently reminded us, it is about, the vitality and the future of our society. And that's what we're really talking about. So I want to thank all of our panelists and partners, Jessica, Pastor Kiki, Rebecca. It's really just a pleasure to see you in this moment, and excited to be seeing you and working with you in person going forward. Lots of links and suggestions were mentioned. A lot of that we have on our own website, and we'll include some of that in the follow-up. And you can learn more about JCRC's immigration work in partnership with all these amazing organizations and partners by going to our website, and we'll include a link in the chat. And let me just, before people go, say we have several speaker series programs coming up in the next couple of weeks. You can check them out on our website and register. We'll include that link as well. And just let people know that actually our next series is a two-parter starting later this week about the crisis in Israel, and hearing perspectives from our partners, both Jewish and Arab Israelis who've been navigating living with the trauma of recent weeks. We'll hear from them about the current situation and what's next. And the first program will be this Thursday at noon. And part 2 will be next Tuesday, June 1st, also at noon. Thank you all for joining us together today. And really just a pleasure to see you all. We're really just fortunate to have this wonderful panel. Thank you.